competency is not a prerequisite for dignity at work. You don't have to be the best performer before your colleagues start to treat you like a human being. It's not contingent. Human rights are not contingent upon performance. And so going into a space where I met coaches who will say, let's first get you to be top performing, then we'll handle the poor behavior. Well, that sends the wrong kind of message that respect, humanity is contingent upon me being the absolute best of every single person that I work with.
Have you experienced burnout, trauma, discrimination, bullying, or harassment at work? To many of us, hearing that this kind of thing still goes on in the modern workplace is surprising. We may even use the word shocking. But today we'll be discussing why that isn't always a helpful reaction, the importance that language can play in that debate, and more. My guest is Jimi Okubanjo, a former management consultant, TEDx speaker, and filmmaker. Jimi has witnessed firsthand the challenges that women of colour in particular can face in their careers and the toll that that sort of thing takes. And today has a passion for helping others overcome this kind of workplace trauma and find joy in their careers. Her journey includes the TED Talk called Supporting Others with Workplace Trauma, which I have to say I've watched it. It is excellent. And more recently, the documentary Arise Firebird, which explores the themes of resilience and empowerment in the face of adversity. So today we're going to be tackling some important, meaningful, and sometimes uncomfortable topics. And Jimi is a perfect guide to take us on that journey with the experiences she's had, the empathy and compassion and humour that she offers to the conversation as well. So without further ado, let's welcome her onto the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
So, Jimi, thank you for joining me this afternoon. It's great to have you on the show and lovely to meet you as well.
Nice to meet you as well, David.
Let's introduce the episode. I'll hand it over to you, really, to tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career background, what you get up to today, and why you do it.
Sure. So my name is Jimi Okubanjo. I'm the director, producer of a documentary film called Arise Firebird, Women of Color Transcending and Finding Joy at Work. And before that, I worked for 20 plus years in operations and management consulting. In my last role, I was a chief operating officer or a director of operations for a 3,500 person engineering company in London. And I crashed out of my consulting career due to a lot of the topics that we discuss in the movie. And, but I've, so what I do, what we hope with the film, Arise Firebird, is to make films that advocate underrepresented professionals in the workplace, but also celebrate their resilience and celebrate their accomplishments. But from a place of real honesty, opposed to fluff, or puff pieces. So the documentary, we interviewed 3 women of color who worked in and around London. So we had stories from Kingston, from Kent, from Manchester, but their careers were all like, in London, and kind of what they faced and how they overcame the challenges with the reality of being a woman of color working in England in the 2020s, and also what they're doing now that makes them happy. And my hope is really for anyone who's really struggling with toxic work, whoever you may be, to understand that it's not just in your head. You're not just imagining it, but also to shine a light for employers and managers to begin to have better conversations about what does it really take to create a workplace where people can thrive and do their best work and also want to stay.
A lot in there to get into, which we're going to, I'm sure. So let's start then by telling us a bit more about the film itself and what experiences led you into making it.
Absolutely. So Arise Firebird, we started working on the film in mid 2021. Took us about 2 years to get it finished.
Okay.
And what led me to do this, so I had taken a break from my last role, and I was really dejected. I had felt incredibly, I think, frustrated and disillusioned with myself, disappointed in myself for not finding a way to kind of work through the things I had seen in 20 odd years in a variety of different companies. I felt a bit ashamed. I felt ashamed, deep humiliation in myself. And I didn't really feel that I could do anything. So in the process of this, I had a lot of conversations with women, men, people around the world. A lot of Americans. I live in Kent. So I'm pretty certain your American viewers will hear the English. Oh, she's very English. The British viewers like, no, you don't sound English at all. So it's one of those kind of ways of speaking. But I spoke to a lot of Americans, some British people. But I began to hear a lot of the stories in terms of just how shocked people were by how I was not by how I was being treated, but the extent to which I was trying to figure out how I could work through it. There are a lot of horror, like that's not something you're supposed to try to work through. That's something you're supposed to call the police about. Those kinds of things. And, but everything was like, no, I'll work through it. I'll figure it out. So when we began to listen to stories of women in England, I began hearing a lot of the same kind of desperation, sadness, despair, frustration, anger, fear, confusion, bewilderment. And when I would talk about my story, people would ask me like, so what did you do to cause this? When they called you the N-word, or when they said they could have hired a white man for your job, when they threatened you, what were you doing that warranted someone to treat you that way? And I was like, and so once I'd explained, like, oh no, you didn't do anything. And I didn't want to keep on having to explain what happened or have to convince friends and family that I wasn't making up. No, I wasn't going to work drunk and mouthing off and letting out, infestation of spiders in the office. That wasn't what was causing it. I wasn't falling asleep to work. I was hitting my targets. I was exceeding my targets. That wasn't it. It just wasn't, performance was not the issue. And, I felt people say, well, once you've proven performance is an issue, then we'll look at race. If you can hit all the performance targets, then we know it's not a gender issue and a race issue. But what I found, David, is that every company has a Harold or a Gordon or Hermione, a cranky, cantankerous person, highly problematic, who is not performing. But they're allowed to be untouched and run riot. That's a little bit racist, a little bit sexist. And by little bit, I mean a lot bit. They're a little bit of a bully. They're a little bit of misogynist. They're a little bit threatening. They're a little bit horrible. They just make a couple people cry. Everyone knows they're a bit of a problem. We know these companies have these people. So companies can keep people in their space that are not performing. And I don't think it's fair. And what we hope with the movie is to let people know that you don't have to be, competency is not a prerequisite for dignity at work. You don't have to be the best performer before your colleagues start to treat you like a human being. It's not contingent. Human rights are not contingent upon performance. Mm-hmm. And so going into a space where I met coaches who will say, let's first get you to be top performing, then we'll handle the poor behavior. Well, that sends the wrong kind of message that respect, humanity is contingent upon me being the absolute best of every single person that I work with. But, not everybody wants to be the best or should have to be the best to be treated well or to be treated like a human being. If I went to the international chicken shack of the world and I ordered some, French fries and they brought my fries to me and my fries were frozen, I don't have the right to insult the server and be so belligerent, even though it's clearly the fries are frozen. I don't. And they would, and that the 24-year-old, 19-year-old weekend crew chief could call the police, and they'd have the abusive customer thrown out, and the entire might of that organization would back the crew chief, even though the fries were served frozen. They wouldn't say, well, yeah, okay, you can slap them around a little bit, you can insult them a little bit, you can be a little bit belligerent, a little bit, because, you know, they know. Mm. So we have people who are coming, and they're coming to work, and they're working in very hostile environments, wrapped up as being, you know, we're inclusive, wrapped up in a lot of rhetoric. We'll just first show us you're the best that we ever saw in the whole world. And then we'll start taking the accusations of discrimination, the accusations of ableism seriously. Just show us first you're the best that ever existed. Then you have the right to talk about all the other treatment.
It's interesting that you use the analogy of hospitality and the catering world there, because that's probably one of the most common examples, isn't it, where it's more socially acceptable, in inverted commas, to do exactly that and insult the person who's brought you the rubbish food or the wrong order. And most people have had that experience. But you're right. I mean, it highlights such a huge double standard, doesn't it, clearly in your experiences. I mean, the first reaction I would like to think of any reasonable person for your story there is, even before you got to the part where you say, you know, respect is not contingent on performance, way before then, like in my head, I was thinking, well, hang on, no, that's not right, is it? Like, that clearly, you know, it doesn't matter what your performance is like, even if you had brought in the horde of spiders or something, I think you said there.
Box of spiders.
Yeah. Even if you had done that, like, that doesn't justify the other behavior, does it? There's ways of managing performance that, yeah. And there's right ways of managing performance, even if that was the problem, which it clearly wasn't here.
I mean, if I brought a box of spiders in, you call the police. I mean, that's it. You just don't get involved in that. You don't have to.
Yeah. Or maybe like have a conversation and look into why you've done that and what was it that made you feel like you had to do that, and that was.
But you can also call also call the police. You don't
Indeed,
have to. We'll just do it ourselves. We'll just arrest you and lock you in and do our. Yeah, I think that. I don't reasonableness. I have a very different relationship with the reasonableness, because I don't know, because I feel like when I tell some of the stories and people say that's shocking, Jimmy, like we can't believe this happens. It actually hurts a little bit every time someone says it's shocking, because for people in my community, it's not shocking. It's like, we've been talking about this for decades. This is not new. So the shocking piece comes in the fact that I'm shocked that you haven't believed all the times this has been raised. You've chosen not to believe it because you've thought, okay, well, they're just playing the race card. They're just like, I would love to have that card to play, because clearly, I mean, I hear great things about this race card, but where can I get one? I can play it, and then you get something back from it. I wish I knew I wish that this was a thing, I'm 5 feet, a short person card, the women's card. What is that? I say this in the sense that I don't know what reasonableness is, because the people who have done this are reasonable people. They aren't people, caricatures in suits and, green faces with a black hat and a cauldron. These aren't. They're everybody. They look and talk like normal people. They are. Many of them consider themselves to be liberal in many ways, and it's not. I think that one thing I would love people from this space to take away from is that these aren't straight out there, some guy behind a tree, cackling and planning this. It's us. We are the ones doing this. It's not a stranger. Allies who wear the lanyards and do all this. They also say some of the horrible statements. I mean, as we've been promoting our film, some of the most hurtful statements I've received have come from heads of DEI.
Wow.
Yeah. And heads of HR.
That's less surprising, sadly.
So it's in terms of, it's not what you're saying isn't true. What you're saying isn't real. That that we think we'd rather have, that's what we hear from a lot of these people. Now, a lot of these is a DI. The ones who say this tend to be heads of HR, tend to be men who say this, or white women definitely tend to be the ones who say the more unpleasant things. But I've had a couple Black women say things that have also been very upsetting. And again, it shows the degree of how much we've internalized the toxic views about the stories of people and people of color and women, and how uncomfortable it is that we really, but it's very prevalent. But I do think all of them will be considered to be reasonable people. I would consider them to be reasonable people. So reasonableness, if that's all it took, we wouldn't have this problem.
Fair point, yes. And I think that actually makes it a lot more scary, doesn't it? And yeah, I mean, shocking is, I get where you're coming from. And this is, I think, one of the interesting things about the context and language, isn't it? Shocking versus surprising, maybe, I think.
I mean, it may be for you. I mean, for me, it's not. It's like saying, you know, I just discovered water is wet. You know,
no, fair, yeah.
it would like, you know, it's like if I've never seen water. So I'll tell you that was surprising for me. I was in my 30s when I realized, because I lived in many different countries, so I never really believed in Santa Claus. I grew up people who didn't really believe in Santa Claus, and I went to school with people who never did. So I was in my 30s when I realized for the first time, it was shocking that people actually were raised believing Santa was real. I did not know this. That was shocking. I remember the moment. I remember the moment. I was sitting with somebody, and it's a grown man was like, you really were raised that way. That's shocking. So it's always going to be that situation, but it speaks to something. I was shocked by that because I have a worldview where on movies, kids believe in Santa Claus. Like in movies, people fly. I just assumed I can enjoy a film where seeing a child believe in Santa is like watching Superman fly. It's fictional entertainment. It took a while. Okay, no, it's actually real. Because I never did. I remember going to Santa when I was really young and getting very angry because he kept lying to me. Because my parents at home never said, it wasn't like, they were like, no, there's Santa, but it's fun. It was so fun. But just don't lie. It's great. I mean, I went to McDonald's and see all the back in the day, they had the McDonald's parties and you have all the little, I knew that Grimace wasn't real, but I still had fun hanging out with Grimace. So I remember that. I do remember that Santa thing. And it still makes me a bit angry that he just kept lying because there was no point to lie with that. It just made it less special. But that still being said, that was shocking. And I think for some people, it'd be like, I'm surprised you're shocked. So that's how I think for me it is that I do think for lots of people who watch this film who are not from the affected groups, they will, the word shocking is the answer. And that's the truth. And it is true. What I'm coming to terms with is that, that's the reality, that it is shocking. And it's sad for me that it's still shocking, which is why I'm glad the film is here. So hopefully people can recognize, okay, it's not shocking anymore. It should be less shocking and know that this is the reality in which we exist. And it maybe, we know this and we choose to operate in this reality.
Yes. Yeah. I get where you're coming from and I understand what you're saying. I probably agree. For people who are outside of that group who've not had those experiences, though, particularly in this country, I think it's a bit more out in the open in the States, potentially, but you can correct me if I'm wrong there. I think a lot of people in that position in this country, certainly, it's easier to believe that it's not that bad compared to even the States, whereas actually it's maybe just a bit more under the radar and a bit more covert, and that's why it appears shocking. And it can be quite confronting as well, I think. I've not personally experienced it, but, a lot of people who I've spoken with over the years have, and they come to that point of realization where they thought it was quite an equitable society or quite an equitable workplace, and then one of their colleagues has been through a quite unpleasant experience, and they realized suddenly, the eyes have been opened, and shocking is the right word when it happens at that point, I think. When we get to the point we are now in society, and without getting into the politics of it, whether or not this sort of thing is still surprising, that's, I think, a different question. Sadly, it's probably not. So I guess the next question then is, if the vast majority of the people doing these things are just normal, reasonable people, why is it, do you think, it is such a common thing?
I think we all want to believe that there's good in the world is fundamentally good. I think that. And we all want to believe we're fundamentally good people because it helps us operate. I mean, it's hard to operate in a world where you think there's something wrong. And sometimes when you're faced with truth that maybe, we're causing harm, that I am causing harm as an individual versus society. It hurts, David. Mm-hmm. Think of the last time someone gave me some feedback about something that matters to me. I'm like, what the hell? What? I'm never going to talk to you again. In fact, you know what? I don't need to speak to you on that issue. It's hard to come in and tell someone and to tell someone, they're causing real harm. Because if you are a human and you are, and you emote within certain parameters, it doesn't feel nice. It doesn't. Now, some people don't emote within certain parameters for various reasons, and that's a different story, honestly, because we have a massive spectrum in how our brains work. But for a lot of us, I'd imagine it just really hurts. And then how do you get support from that? And then who do you go to kind of talk through that with? So if the people in one's community are like you, then you'll probably get reassurance that don't mind them, they're just saying that, because that helps take you out of the pain. And that can move you out of that pain very quickly, saying, don't mind, Jimmy, she's just trying to play that race card. If you go into the people who are being victimized, you may be faced with people who are in real pain that was caused, that again, maybe that you caused. And they're not going to have that space. You want me to hold, if you broke my leg, you broke my leg when you're driving, when you weren't paying attention to driving, you're not asking me to try and make you feel better about the fact that my leg is broken and it hurts. I'm just to take the image of that issue of the street, right? On the street, person broken leg, they're bleeding. The driver parks the car and asks them, can you tell me, how did I hurt you? It's like, so where do you then go? So where does that person go to process the fact that they have done something? Because it's not, and so the temptation may be going to the victim in their pain, which isn't really maybe the best place to go first. Or going to people who say, no, she was walking at night without high vis, so don't mind. You should have hit her, it's fine, no problem. Just, just roll the board into the bushes and drive off, not a big deal. So I think there's that space around what I hope with the Arise Firebird, but also with people who want is with the Arise Firebird, with TED Talk we did, but also with they have other resources to begin to find a safe space to inquire, to ask those questions. I know some people hire coaches to help them in this space because that is a safe space to talk about it and to admit you don't know. Like if I began to suspect, I joke about with Santa with kids because it's fun, because I just like to tease children, which is why I kept up that helped me keep up the Santa facade and not spoil anybody's young Christmas. But when I began to realize kids believe this, for example, I didn't go to children and start asking, do you really believe Santa is real? Right? I had to go to a safe space and talk to other people about it. But I didn't go to the kids to asking, like, why? Or people who make money in the Santa business saying, why do you perpetuate this? Because they're going to be very defensive. If I'm kind of asking those kind of questions, they may get defensive. And the young children will be like, what are you trying to ask? Like, they may now begin to fit it all together. Santa isn't real because, Jimmy's asking these questions that are feeding on their own suspicions that have been growing over years. And I think that safe space is important for anybody to be able to go and ask to make an investment if it's important. That may be a financial investment and maybe a time investment to begin to get educated on this and to build one's awareness on these issues if it matters. I know I am a cis, straight woman, able-bodied Black woman. So while in many ways I receive a disproportionate amount of challenges, I also recognize that transgendered women, men, women, people with disabilities who are Black women with disabilities, neurodiverse, depending on, again, how that manifests, there is a lot of more people, even within my own community, who have a much harder time. And I cannot say that I know what they're going through. I can speak for them. I have to also go and do my work within and the other communities as well. Not just within the Black female space. I have to go and I have to continue to do my work. And the truth is, it's exhausting, David. It can be exhausting, but I think the phrase that comes to my mind is radical empathy. If I want to be in a relationship and I have to commit probably for the rest of my life to want to know these things.
So there's another interesting analogy you've chosen there with the car accident, and I think that's wrapped up quite nicely in the problem here about admitting fault even to yourself when you're the one who's caused harm. Probably way before we were born, the societal norm when you get to that point is you apologise and you try and make it right. I think in today's society, especially in the case of the car crash analogy, it's the opposite. It's never admit fault. And we see this at political levels. We see this day to day on the street, in the workplace, because admitting fault and saying that you were wrong is weakness. It leads to negative consequences for you, for your organisation, for financial health, whatever it may be, and whatever the situation is. And I do think that's part of the problem as well, because if your default is to avoid the responsibility, whether it's deserved or not, that's another question that I'm not qualified to get into by any means. But if you can't even get to that point, then how are you ever going to get to the next point where you're talking about building that empathy, understanding where people are coming from, seeking out that safe space, and then one day, hopefully, getting to a point where we're at least starting to solve the issues?
With the car analogy, I think, I don't know about the days of yore, because I know the days of old, because I also hear stories about people who hit and run exists as, at least in some jurisdictions, that it's a crime to hit and run because people would hit and run. So clearly something was being done in those days of old, where people were hitting and running. Thus, they had to put the laws in place to stop them. Well, not to stop, at least they have, like, you don't hit someone and then drive off. So, but I do think but I do think in terms of, let's say the accident happens, and it's a because here's something I also want to be clear as I say this. I've made mistakes. I know I've harmed people, intentionally, unintentionally. It could be expectations weren't met. Okay, that you thought that I would come and paint your house. And I was just coming to have coffee, but you really thought I was going to come paint your house. And that causes pain and that causes difficulty. And there may be nothing I can do in that scenario, except for, maybe not even apologize. I thought I made it clear. I'd come and have coffee and talk about what you want to do with painting. But you really thought, no, I was talking about coming to paint and then have coffee later. It's not always as straight as, so with the hit and run, it's not always as straightforward, because someone can be hurt really because of various other reasons that are out of our own control. And yes, we can then be the focal point of that pain. This is why the conversation is important. Having the safe place to really unpack it and discuss it and be comfortable in that discomfort, that it's not always going to be yellow or purple, a hit or I didn't hit. It's a case of Sometimes just driving the streetcar down the street is causing someone distress. And it may be that, that may make you feel uncomfortable. As a human being, I feel uncomfortable, but I've got to drive my car. But if I'm driving my car down the street and I'm hitting people, that's different. But it's being able to have that discussion in terms of what is actually going on here. Because some of these situations, there is some nuance involved. It may be the person, for example, maybe you're driving down the street and someone says, "You stole my car," and they have a heart attack and they die, right? You didn't steal that car. Your car just looks just like theirs. But again, you may feel there's still some emotion to unpack just because that person's past trauma has come up in that moment and you were the catalyst for a fatal heart attack. That's what we're talking. So what does that mean? It means, people who've dealt with abuse from a previous employer, and this can be any person, any human. They've been abused in a previous employing setting. They've changed jobs and they've come to work for you. They may be carrying stuff emotionally, mentally into this new job because I haven't found any scientific studies to back this up. I haven't found any scientific studies that prove changing job miraculously cures all mental health issues. So we can say, well, you may be the one employer that puts everybody like they're amazing. You could be like you're the one employer. You've done the work. You created a safe space. You're doing all the right things for your team members. You're really, really over-indexing to make a space a great space, as well as linking it to great performance. You're hitting your numbers, and clients love you, customers love you. You're able to pay bonuses. You're hitting all your stock prices going up. It's just a great company, and some companies have those moments. We're still recruiting people from a job market that treats their employees badly. And so you're going to bring someone who has that history into your space. How are we able to support them in that? Especially they may not even know themselves they're dealing with that. So us having a very realistic approach that as we're hiring more knowledge workers, who we need them to use their minds and their ingenuity and their thinking to work. They're also coming in from spaces where they may be traumatized or abused. So I definitely think what I would encourage companies to do when they would, even using our movie or other movies or resources, is to create spaces for leaders to have that difficult conversation, to really say, what do we need as an organization in this time? What do I need as a manager? Because again, I think another massive assumption is just because you're a senior executive, you don't have any mental health needs. So we always say, if you have an issue, take it up, just escalate to your boss. But at some point, there's going to be a boss who's the final source of escalation, unless they're like, some sort of deity. How is that going to work? How are we helping our leaders also process this? Because they're going to make mistakes. And it's one thing in terms about admitting culpability or not admitting culpability and what you can legally or not legally do, but they still need the space to process what they've done and how they're going to improve and go better, and have the space to take some healthy risks, knowing that some of them will not pan out. And there may be some backlash, and there may be some really hurt tears. And that's not an excuse to run away and say, okay, we're never going to do it. Because no, but actually, how do we support those who maybe were hurt through what we tried to do? Knowing that some of it, they may see the attempt, but the pain is still there. Again, going back to the driving example, you didn't intend to hit someone. We're paying attention fully. It wasn't intentional, but it still happened. Is one going to stop driving forever because of that? Yeah.
Or just ignore that it ever happened.
Yeah.
And try and just pretend that it didn't. You're absolutely right. I completely agree with you. The conversation is the key, isn't it? And being open to having that, even though it's uncomfortable. There's that cliche that nothing worthwhile is easy. Mm-hmm. I think that this squarely falls in that category, doesn't it? The other way of looking at it is the risk, the danger if you close that conversation off, you try and ignore the problem, you try and run away, whichever. The person in the other, I don't want to say the other side of the argument, because it's not really an argument, is it? But the other the other party, let's say, they then have to fill in the gaps with assumptions about why you've done what you've done. And if you're not willing to talk about it, human nature, sadly, then the natural assumption is you've done that on purpose and you don't care.
I think there's definitely part of that, because they will have to tell themselves whatever they tell themselves for them to be able to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, at the very least, like, if you didn't do it on purpose, you don't care. At least at the very least, you don't care. For the person affected, it might help them in their healing process to at least have some conversations with you on that. But I think the other challenge would be from a company standpoint. You think about company culture. People who can leave will leave. And so people who where that environment offends them truly. So it's like a race to the bottom. And there's some, I won't name some, but we know some companies where that's more of a problem than others. It's a race to the bottom because those are regardless of ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation. If what's going on there so offends them, they will go and work somewhere else. Those who are I'm not a perpetrator, but I can live with this kind of behavior, they'll stay. Your underrepresented groups, those who have options to go to other places will go to other places. So you will get, I just imagine what that kind of company, so the more one delays to try to have these conversations, the harder it's going to be, because you're going to get less and less people, less and less of the kinds of people who could champion it staying, and moving on. So you're going to get probably people who for whatever reason can't leave or not prepared to leave, but they may not be vying to get promoted. They just want to stay in their role for your underrepresented groups. And you'll get those who can will promote themselves and hop into another space and look for their success somewhere else. And then the leaders you need to really drive this are going to be going to other companies. So you're going to get leaders who actually, I've seen that where it is just going to spiral where it's unpleasant. The consequences is we know that in certain sectors, there is a skill shortage. To have a skill shortage and to know that women and people of color do not want to work in those sectors. For example, I know a lady who's a mathematician who drives a bus. A mathematician in the UK drives a bus. And, we know which sector does not need. I'm not teaching. I mean, mathematicians are needed in probably most of the scientific and engineering sectors. And she's driving a bus. We have a lot of people like that who are advanced technical degrees who are doing who have checked out of that space. And so, but we have a shortage, like nuclear power is a shortfall. Healthcare, there's a shortfall. And we're having these qualified people who are just leaving the industry entirely. And you have to try, and how are they going to meet that shortfall up? So the idea, we'll just go ahead and compete for the same people. You can. But many of them are checking out of it. So I think there's that space in terms of, for us society, our power, our water, we need these people working for us society to continue. And they're choosing not to because they're being treated badly at a very high level.
Yeah, it's one that comes up a lot, particularly around the STEM careers and gender. I've had heated arguments with people about that in past jobs. The one that always wound me up the most was none of these kinds of people are applying for the jobs, so there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that too, and I hear that, and I think that it's not worth arguing on those kind of statements, because I feel like if it really mattered, they would find the people. It's because it doesn't matter and they can get away with that. And there's the belief I've had many, do we even have Black women who are mathematicians in the UK? Do they even do those kind of careers? If I ask people, what do you think I do for a living? That's you sell jewelry, you work, they wouldn't ever admit that I have an engineering background, 22 years, and they wouldn't. So I don't think that, so this goes back to the point around, for why this conversation is important, because it's a difficult conversation to have. Like, if we're not bringing the right people, right, what's going on with our process? But it's a hard conversation because it means maybe looking at oneself, and it is painful in terms of challenging beliefs and systems. I honestly believe this. You want to find any kind of STEM person, look at bus drivers. You'll find them there driving. Yeah, I got 2 degrees in physics, a PhD in, theoretical physics, and you're driving a bus. Like, I'm never going to go back. Never. So one day I'll do, maybe there'll be a project, So now I'll start going through the bus drivers and finding out, especially in London, like all the scientists that we have that drive buses in the city, and talk about why are they doing that. But it's just an uncomfortable conversation, and I think that's the bottom line with it.
Mm.
Because if there was the need, if there was a real focus, they would be able to find the candidates.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen happen, and thinking back to what you were speaking about at the beginning of the episode about the underperformers who are tolerated, what happens is, in the absence of finding the well-qualified candidates, they will just hire one of those underperformers who technically might have the right qualifications, but isn't going to do as good a job as if they'd maybe cast the net a bit wider and maybe thought about some of these bus drivers, for example.
Well, I'll try to get them before. Yeah, casting net wide. The key is you've got to cast net wider. Yeah. If I want to hire engineers that are, I want to say, who've also worked in the circus, and there is something about that, then yeah, I'm going to probably have to start. I'm going to have to start. I'm not going to just put it on my website, right? I'm going to have to go into spaces where circus performers hang out. Mm. I have to go to where they are. They're not hiding. You just go to where they are to hang out. Go to communities where they've been disengaged as well. So, and what will it take to re-engage you back into this space? They're not hidden. I mean, I have tons of people that reach out to me who are like, I'm never going back, or if you ask me, I can probably get you some people for those roles. It's the double bind they may get for more senior roles is you've got people who've been burned. And when you have a company that's not been successful at retaining especially women of color senior leaders, if I'm going to a company and they haven't been able to have a woman that looks like me be successful in 2024, the truth is that I probably will be a little bit cautious, because it's 2024. It's not like it was 1984. Mm. So there's, and if they're not aware of how they've gotten there, like, no, we don't know. We don't know. We just do our best. That's probably a red flag, opposed to like, no, they're really aware of kind of the issues they're having and they're doing some work around it. Perhaps that would be different. That's very different. But if they're like, no, we just can't find any people. That's why of our 500 managers, they all kind of look a certain. We may have gender diversity, but that's kind of as far as it goes. Then I would be like, yeah. So it's a hard conversation. It really is, and I don't want to discount, because I don't want to sound to anyone who's like you're sitting and you have a board and you have 12 people in your board and your management team, you've got 30 managers and you only have 3 white women and the rest are all white men, or maybe 1 Asian or 1 black person. That's it. And what are you trying to say, that we're horrible people? No, I don't. It's complicated. Mm-hmm. And I think just starting by having that conversation, because often we don't see our blind spots. We can't see our blind spots, what they're called blind spots. And starting to have that conversation, like, what if we just are casting our net in the wrong space? We're trying to fish mackerel in the Thames. We're trying to fish mackerel off the coast of Ireland. Mackerel's a deep water fish. So maybe we just got to go in the deep water to fish for mackerel and not try to fish for it in the Thames. It's not because if we put our net in the Thames, I know if I put my fishing net in the Thames, I'm not going to get mackerel. So why, I'll prove it. So I'm not being anti-mackerel. We put the fish net in the Thames and no mackerel came back. Yeah, but because the mackerel don't swim in the Thames.
We could talk about this for an hour at least, couldn't we? Quite easily. Just
it's important for us not to. But I think what's also it could turn into is an accusation.
Yeah.
That okay, the HR person isn't doing their job properly. The recruiter doesn't know what to do. They don't understand the environment, and it's not that. There are probably other factors that are going on. For example, if they may not have the budget, maybe they have no recruiting budget. All they can do is stick it up on their website. That's all they are allowed and able to do. That's not a recruiter issue. That's not an HR issue. That's a leadership issue in terms of that. Maybe they want to have a way. They want to go to career fairs or have or revamp their work programs, and they're told they can't do that because insurance said or legal just said no, and there's no conversation with legal about how to make it happen. So they're really constrained. Or another company puts jobs up on their website, and they seem to get all kinds of people coming. And I've now moved to this company. We're not getting it, and we can't understand. So it's because it can really be a situation saying, well, just try harder. But there are things that are going on in the company. There are things, and the issue about recruiting is without retention, it becomes a lot harder. So if you can't retain people, recruiting does become harder because people in that community who've left are going to be in the same pool. And then then someone joining will know I don't have a long-term career here. So I'm not even going to come here with a long-term strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's against a race to the bottom. So you've got to talk about retention, and you can't talk about retention without progression. So again, if you want people to stay, they've got to be able to see really themselves at different levels, not just the head of marketing and then nothing. They've got to be able to see their space for them at different stages of the organization. It's definitely a harder conversation. So I think for us, I do think that in terms of next steps for companies, it's really having those conversations in terms of our culture, in terms of how comfortable can we as leaders have these hard chats? Because understand, inclusion, equity, diversity, belonging is only one kind of hard conversation, David. We have conversations about integrity, corruption, health and safety. Conversations are hard conversations to have.
Yeah.
Performance improvement, mental health, mental well-being, personal finances. A lot of our employees who work for us, we don't know what's going on with them financially, and that's going to be a big issue in terms of they spend all the time at working, they're not looking after themselves financially, and that could be a problem. So we do need to get, I think, just generally across the board, better at having these uncomfortable conversations where we're not looking to dominate and have like you are right, I am wrong, but actually how do we get to better? How do we have a conversation that allows us to grow versus feel ashamed and humiliated?
So much of what you've said there, I wish we had more time to get into it. I think when you think about the recruitment and the retention piece, and you look at things, I can't remember the exact statistic, but the FTSE 100, the number of any minority really, I mean, pick one. It almost doesn't matter in terms of the statistics. In every case, I think it's single-digit percentage, isn't it? At best, I think there's a couple of the groups that it's less than 1% in some cases at senior executive levels. And with what you're saying there about the retention piece, you're right. If you don't get that bit working, then this problem is never going to be solved, is it? And I think it is, as you say, it's about casting the net wider. It's about understanding where these different groups of people can be found, and not just assuming if you throw a job advert on LinkedIn or something that everyone in the world can and will find it, because that's clearly not the case.
I've never got a job off. I've never been hired for a job I applied for.
Well, that's interesting.
So I'll be honest. I would never, if someone said, Jimmy, I'm looking for a new role, I would never tell them to start applying for jobs on LinkedIn or any, because they've never worked for me. And I was a chief operating officer. I'm ex-McKinsey. I worked at Next Shell. So for me, that's not how I've gotten a job. So yes, I would never apply for a job that's advertised. because we know that the vast majority of jobs are not advertised.
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it?
This is this. So I think where we come with the movie Arise Firebird, it's more around that retention, the retention space progression, because I think recruitment is probably the easiest thing to solve. Because recruitment ends from, I guess, when they pass their probation. Let's just say that's like 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months, depending on the organization. Yeah, but do they make it past the first year, second year, 5 years? Like that's because that's about company culture.
Indeed.
And I think the issue at chicken and the egg is progression is a big factor for recruitment. So if people can see that people are progressing, they can stay. But you can have the culture matters and progression. If you have a wonderful culture and it's wonderful, but people aren't getting promoted. I mean, you'd wonder how wonderful the culture is if no one's getting promoted. People will leave to go and look for something somewhere else. If you have a toxic culture, people are going to leave. So it's, and I think for some companies, I'll be honest, they're probably organizations who really don't need to diversify. You know, they have all the staff they need. They don't have any staffing shortfalls. They don't particularly feel bad about what they have no moral impetus to do it. They just like, no, we have everybody here looks like us. We're doing okay. We've been around for however long. And the truth is, if that's that organization, there's nothing really much I can say to that, except for, I get, you do you in that sense. But for a lot of other companies, they skill shortage standpoint, from a, retirement standpoint, from a being able to bid for contract standpoint, just on even from the moral, so from a moral standpoint, productivity standpoint, they know that they're going to jump off a cliff. They're going to drop off. They're going to need to increase their workforce by diversifying to be able to fill the shortfall. Those are probably the ones I probably speak to more, because there's a business need to diversify. There'll be legal penalties, legislational penalties in terms of that, and also customers not wanting to purchase from them anymore. Take the example, Victoria's Secret. They had a big pushback over time because people, you don't need me to buy from you. That's fine. I won't buy from you. It's okay, cool. No problem. Nothing personal. It's never occurred to me ever to go and shop at Victoria's Secret until very recently, because I've started seeing different kinds of people. That's Victoria's Secret. Okay, sure. But no, they're just not for me. Nothing personal. It's just not really for me. I mean, something random that happened. I went to a glasses store recently to look for some glasses, and I was walking around and I saw like a reflection of myself. Oh, and I looked at, and I wasn't a reflection of myself. It was a black model. I was so not used to seeing that when I saw one, I just thought it was my reflection.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that says it all, really, doesn't it?
And I remember that, like, wow, so this is what it means to see yourself. And I just was like, and so I'm going to get my glasses from there. It's like, okay, let me see what they have. So now I walk past the glasses shop and I still look back and see if I can see the person. It does a lot but that's from a consumer standpoint. So if you're in a business, you're not selling to people, you don't need my income, then I mean, there's a legal standpoint, an ethical piece, but sure, not a problem. But the problem is now is like, people get very entrenched when it comes to shopping. We build habits. So if you want to get a shopper for life, definitely figure out how to get people like me early, so you'll get me to the rest of my life, so I won't change and shift. I would say it makes it worth it. But for those who really want to be, I definitely think in terms of relevance, it's going to be harder and harder for companies not to move on this. But again, I think they're going to do it in their own. They're going to do it in their own time and in their own way.
Yeah, I suppose it's just different ways of looking at the same the same issue, isn't it? But I mean, if it's going to be driven by the customer behavior as the market changes and the makeup of the population in that market, as you say with that example with Victoria's Secret, if they don't change, then they lose business. Or at a management level, say if everyone around the table in the boardroom looks the same, has had the same experience, has always worked for the same company or kind of company, has always been in the same industry, do you really need all of them at that point? If everyone's got the same, you might as well just have like one or two of them, right? So,
yes.
And that's the bit for me. It's like, if you don't have the diversity around the table in the conversation, contributing to the decision making, the quality of decisions suffers immensely. And that's the bit that's always stuck with me. And like the financial bits of it aside, the marketplace aside, it's the right thing to do, but also it will give you better quality of outcome. And that's what's always persuaded me.
And I'll say I agree. I do believe over time, companies will do better, but because the world in which we're living is becoming more complex as well, becoming much more global. So yes, it's the problems we're trying to solve are much more complicated now. Companies are competing on a scale, maybe, in the old days, just the butcher shop in the town yonder. But now you're looking at very complicated business models. Yeah, so having that diversity of thinking is important because we have to look at these problems through different avenues. But if everybody really is the same person, we're not going to be able to compete. I mean, we're looking at corporations were surprised, companies were surprised by the growth of China. But if people had understood the Chinese economy and were even up to date a little bit, it wouldn't have been a surprise. But again, because of the kind of standard thinking, okay, so now we all see China. Who's coming up after China? India, perhaps. Who's after India? But because no one is thinking in those terms, we're just going to be surprised again, and then we'll lay people off because we were surprised, and we'll lay more people off because we were surprised. Versus actually, how do we get ahead of this? And for companies who really want to get ahead, I do believe it's going to be, like I said, the diversity of thinking. But or on the flip side, those that choose not to are going to may fall further behind because those who are investing in it now are going to reap the benefits in the future and will fall behind. And so the only thing I would say is just make sure your pension. So if you're not a diverse company, just make sure your pension isn't in your company stocks. You'll be retired by the time this thing pays off. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. And and it will, again, sooner or later, we'll come back to your ability to attract the right kind of talent as well. And again, we've discussed why representation matters already, and it's come up a few times in the past in other episodes as well. But if people don't feel represented in that business, they're not going to go and work there. So, why would they? And you've got to. And again, it's back to retention as well. Like if you can't keep those people once you get them in, then and with the toxic culture angle as well, then you're never going to solve the management level problem either. And worst case as well, I think companies need to be thinking across their whole industry and sector, because if you turn these people off so badly that they go and become a bus driver, your entire sector has then lost the talent, not just your business. And so you're never going to solve it at an industry or economy wide level either.
That's true.
Anyway, yes, I do find these points really interesting, and I could easily talk about it for loads more time, but I'm conscious I don't want to steal too much time from you. So I just have a couple more questions that I'd like to talk about from a leadership angle.
Yeah. So
the first one I'd be really interested to hear is, what has been your best experience of being led in your career?
Oh, wow. I think when I worked, I used to work in a operations manager in a massive, distribution center, massive, and I had 200 people working for me at some point. My manager, her name was Jerry, and she was the first person I worked with that made me feel safe about making mistakes. She said, if you ever make a mistake, just make sure that I tell her first. That's it. Just make sure I tell her first. And I wish that I had more leaders like that in my career, who would fight for me. in that sense, really fight for, and like to get results, not just be difficult and be a bit, so that would be a good, so that gave me space to experiment. The other leader I had, this one I feel very ambivalent about because it started out really well. The relationship didn't end well, but he was the first person that when I led my first consulting project, it was off the back of his recommendation. And he really was the one that asked for me by name and insisted I would be the one that would lead the project for him. I wasn't even sure I could do it, and he was like, no, I'll help you. And he did.
Well, that's nice, isn't it? Yeah. Always good to be recognized by name, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think he saw potential.
Yeah.
What I liked about him is that he took me on because he saw my potential. It wasn't based on, okay, before you can lead this project, you have to have led 19 projects. But no, he saw that he'd seen me working in a different capacity. Said, this is someone who could lead the project.
Yeah. And the first leader as well. I mean, yes. There's a certain maturity, I think, in leadership to be comfortable enough that you can allow people to make mistakes. And I think it's, once you get to that point, the sky's the limit for your leadership, because it's such a difficult obstacle to get over when you're new at it, I found. And I hear similar things from a lot of people in that position as well.
I also think for her, she was very respected. And so she had the kind of gravitas that she could absorb and reframe a mistake versus, because some of the that had, they didn't have that. So, they usually get, Jimmy did it and they'll like, nope. They say, no, she could contextualize it. So I feel like because if I make a mistake, someone has to absorb the mistake, right? So, it's not just going to go nowhere. A mistake isn't like, I put tea in my coffee or I gave someone tea and coffee. Though that was early in my career, it would be like, we didn't hit our numbers for the day, or I don't even know what kind of mistakes I made. They weren't, but I just, maybe if I don't know, didn't show up at work one day or something. So she was, but it's not just, because what we need to understand is that when mistakes are made, sometimes there is a real business consequence. It's not just, leaders don't micromanage simply well, some do. I think a lot of people don't micromanage because they don't have anything to do. It's really out of fear that something will be dropped. And then something does get dropped. And someone gets hurt. So the work jobs I've had, the consequence of mistakes have been real. Someone could have gotten injured. Now I'm grateful that we took, honestly, I didn't have any accidents like that in my shifts, but it's uncertain. That's what we're talking about in terms of like, if something like that happened. And that's what I meant. If something had happened, like somebody got injured at work under what I was supervising, then I would need to call her first. Health and safety, all of that stuff, but then make sure she needs to find out from me and not through anybody else. So I know that she didn't mean don't call the doctors, the hospital, but it's like, no, she needs to, she needs to be the one that finds out. She's the one that that should be able to, so she knows what's going on, in terms of that. So I'm in, it definitely made me feel safer and want to be that kind of leader. But that also requires having support. That must have meant she had support from her boss as well. And I knew who he was. And I can imagine that he thought very, very highly of her too. But in terms of, I think I remember that particular one speaks to me. The other one, the beginning part of our relationship, he was also someone who saw potential.
Yeah. You make another good point actually as well. It's not just about whether you're new at it or not. It's whether you as the leader have that feeling of security yourself to be able to take on responsibility for those mistakes. And I think you're right. The ones who micromanage are probably the ones who don't feel safe to let people make mistakes, and they feel like the only way to make sure no mistakes happen at all is to go in there and do it themselves and supervise very closely. The irony I find in that one, though, is that it usually leads to more mistakes because you're just standing there nitpicking over someone's shoulder and you're putting them over over the coals under extra pressure, and so
Yeah.
they become more likely to make the mistake that you're trying to avoid. And it's
So I think this goes back to difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Because if a leader is micromanaging, what is the content that's not being had? Do I have the right person in that role? Am I the right person in this role? Do I have the right resources for my job? Have I been given unreasonable expectations? Like there is a difficult conversation that has not been had that needs to be had. And so that we'll just don't micromanage. No, it may be that actually we need 3 more people in the job and then I can let go. Or you've had me hire someone maybe who's a little bit inexperienced, and really what we needed is a bit more of a budget to hire someone to manage that part, to sit in between that role, to mentor that person. But those are hard conversations to have. Like something is going on here. Before we jump to solutions, do we understand what the real problem is?
There's a pretty high percentage, I think, of managers or micromanagers who are doing that just because they don't know any other way to do it. It's all they've ever seen from their managers. It's the only way they can process what they're doing. I think there's a much smaller percentage as well who are doing it just because they have to have control. There's their own issue going on there, perhaps. But yeah, you're right, definitely.
Those are hard conversations. Like, why are you micromanaging?
Yeah, well, quite. Yeah.
Isn't that what a manager's supposed to do? You know?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, definitely.
That's a whole nother conversation about management and leadership. My
Isn't
second
it?
favorite topic.
Oh, good. Okay.
There is this. I'm hoping to do a movie. I'm hoping one day to do a film about management and leadership styles.
Oh, cool.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'll be first in the queue for that one.
Leadership Heroes.
If you had to pick one person, it could be anyone you like, they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Star Trek Discovery, Philippa Georgiou, the captain, the original Philippa Georgiou. She would be somebody that I would love to have been managed and led by her, to work for her. She seems to be a really good. The few scenes we've seen of her, like when she was a lieutenant, she made a case to bring someone into the Federation an alien, and she fought for them to come again untested, and that could have come back to haunt her, come back to bite her in the face. I definitely see someone like that who can take risks, because I feel like I'm somebody that does well with leaders who can take a bit of risk. That I need a little bit of support, a little bit of cheerleading. I've always needed cheerleading, but also given the space to grow, to be my own person, and to blossom in the way that I'm intended to.
Yeah, it's a good pick. We've had quite a few Star Trek ones over the last couple of years, but that's the first time someone from Discovery has been chosen, and certainly this specific character. But it's a really good choice. I don't know why she's always been overlooked there, actually. And another one in Discovery that I find, I wouldn't say I'd pick him as my perfect leader, but I enjoy his journey into leadership, and that was Mr. Saru. Because he starts off as like this really fearful, inexperienced, lacking confidence. He just struck me as, he reminded me of myself the first time I was a manager in a lot of ways. Like, you don't really know what you're doing. Your confidence isn't quite there. You have issues with trusting people around you as well. And then by certainly the end of the most recent series I've seen, he's completely transformed. And so seeing that journey, I found really interesting. Mm-hmm. I love Star Trek as well. You can tell. Yeah.
Well, maybe there's another discussion about leadership styles in Star Trek, because I do have quite a few opinions on the different leadership techniques versus like the Cardassians. Like, I think the Cardassians most accurately represent typical executive leadership.
Ooh.
I do in many ways. And in terms of that's what I really feel the corporate world is a lot like the Cardassian way of doing things.
Yeah.
So it's, put that in the future possibility.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you.
Like some of the corporate things I see with Cardassians, like a lot of the like they're competing. They compete among themselves. They're very polite. It's very rare you see the Cardassians getting angry or frustrated. But it doesn't mean they're they're on your side. So I think in terms of some of the toxic sides of leadership, I would say sits with the Cardassians.
Yeah.
So I like the examples of when they have done atrocious things and they reframe it back into, it was for the greater good. They were trying to help, so it's I definitely see examples of leadership styles that are very Cardassian in their framework. I don't necessarily think the Federation's approach is better either, in terms of what they espouse to do and what they actually do. But that's like a whole Star Trek podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it's I know where you're coming from with the Federation. I think their naivety at like a galactic level is just impressive to see sometimes, isn't it?
Well, but also their desire to assimilate. I mean, the assimilation model, like for you to join them, so their goal is what they desire is to be able to assimilate, into the Federation. They have, rather than having alliances, like they ally with the Klingons. The Klingons, at least as it stands today, don't want to be part of the Federation, but they have very few alliances like that. They really want people to be part of them. And so this idea of like melting versus diversity, like assimilation. And so they talk about that, like the Borg, how are they different from the Borg? A lot of again, look at the representation. A lot of the Federation is human centric. Even like in the future, it's over indexed with humans. It's not the most of us. You go to all the aliens that sit on all the judges. You may have one person that isn't human, but the rest are all human, and largely, European humans, but still a lot of humans, a lot of humanoids. So very few gaseous races that are represented in the Federation. So it's very, it's a very human-centric organization, professing to be, we're very inclusive, but they're actually not.
Yeah, that is true. And I mean, the irony there again is that Star Trek as a TV series has been various decades fairly groundbreaking in terms of diversity and representation. But then, you're right. I mean, the way they portray it is, I mean, I suppose it's catering to the audience to a large extent, isn't it? I don't know if there's any aliens watching Star Trek. There might be. I like
Star Trek, but it comes down to it's my favorite of all science fiction properties. But it's something. So I like it when aliens call them on that, because sometimes they will be called on the fact that they profess this, but they're not. And it's good to see them wrestling with their own issues, because Star Trek tries to tell a story. And the more they can be self-aware of the fact that, granted, we know the reason why they're humanoids is budget. It's a financial, it's a financial issue. We understand that. So, maybe in 50 years when, technology is even better and cheaper, we'll see a lot more different shapes.
Yeah.
Also, as human beings, we like to see humans or humanoid type creatures. It might be hard if the entire bridge is ooze with bubbles. I understand, but it's also a great space to talk about, to bring that into conversation about the fact that the Federation, over half their vessels are human, but humans are not the only ones in the entire race. 1,000 years in the future, and Discovery goes to the future, the president of the Federation, the head, is still a human. Like 1,000 years, you still haven't got a non-human, but the leader of Starfleet is human, but the president of the Federation is Bajoran Cardassian. So we've got some diversity going on there. So I just feel it's a great space to have that conversation, and it's good in terms of, I'm not saying this to knock it, because I actually like the show. There'll probably be episodes where they're called on this, because it's a chance for Star Trek, again, to comment on these society issues in a way that they uniquely can, by pointing the camera against them on themselves. It's like the enslavement of Starfleet's ongoing enslavement of artificial intelligence. Like I still, it's like the whole data thing happened, the whole Doctor happened, and they're still enslaving images and enslaving, enslaving holograms after Voyager. Like we saw all the Doctor episodes.
Yeah.
And it's like they're not even, and it's not being discussed like it's a prejudice the Federation has. That there's,
Yeah.
Because
it's such an interesting one as well, particularly with the holograms, because I mean that came across in quite a few of the series. There was the whole storyline in DS9 about it as well, and it does make me wonder, like, if humanity today encountered an emerging intelligent form of life, how would we deal with it? What would we do? And this is the power of sci-fi, isn't it? That's why I love it.
So my theory is we'd enslave it, exploit it for resources, or eat it. That's pretty much it. That's the human thing. Can it produce something for us? We can make it go work, or we use it as itself. Can we use it as itself to build something for us? And can we like truffle
Yeah, and inevitably we'd probably fight a war over it at some point as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got to ask you then, given you have an engineering background and you're a Star Trek fan, who is your favorite Star Trek engineer?
Oh, that's I love them all. So it would be, I have my top three. I'd say Roxanne Dord, B'Elanna Torres, absolutely, hands down. I just like that she was able to keep that ship running when there was nothing. Just like, sticks and stones, like, that's not even her ship, right? So B'Elanna Torres, Geordi LaForge. Geordi was just great. Again, flagship captain. Went from helmsman to engineering leader. And then Billups from Lower Decks. Billups he's a lot of fun. He's a lot of fun.
He is good fun. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, interesting. I like that you've already got in your mind immediately the top three as well. You didn't have to think about it very much. Yeah.
I have a game I play because I ran a Star Trek group a few years ago where we could pick so it's an icebreaker. It'd be like who's your favorite science officer, nice. And they'd come in and pick their favorite science officer. Who's your favorite head of security? Who's your favorite whatever? And but I think about it from time to time. I do. I probably spend more time reflecting on Star Trek than most people do.
Oh, that's good. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Jimmy. I hope you have as well.
I have, David.
The very, very last thing I'll ask you is if any of the listeners would like to watch your film or get in touch with you and learn more about what you do, would you like to point towards a website or similar?
Yes. So if you're part of a company that would like to bring Arise Firebird into your organization, because that's primarily what we're doing, you can find us on arisefirebird.com. arisefirebird.com.
Lovely. Okay. And I'll pop that link in the episode description as well, so everyone can find it easily. Lovely. Well, thank you again so much for your time. It's been really great talking to you today.
Same here. Take care.
You too. Thank you again, Jimmy, for being with us today. It was an educational and enlightening conversation. I hope the listener has found some useful lessons in there as I have. We covered some important subjects there, but also managed to go into quite some depth on two of my favourite topics, leadership and Star Trek. So I really appreciated that, obviously, and thoroughly enjoyed it too. And I hope, listener, that it's inspired you to think about what you can do from your leadership position to prevent this type of trauma occurring in your workplace or adequately support those who may have been through it already. To learn more about Jimmy and what she does, check the links in the show notes and do reach out to her. And if you haven't already, then don't forget to visit www.leadernotaboss.com and sign up to my newsletter to get your invite to the Integrity Leaders online community. Thank you for listening and for your ongoing support of the Leading with Integrity podcast. Every download, every listen is noticed and is appreciated, listener. Do join me again next week when I'll be chatting to Will Yeski about his experiences in the military, what led him to writing his book, Damn the Valley, and his career before, during, and after the army, and all the leadership lessons he's learned along the way. It's going to be the first episode in a short series of 3 interviews with veterans that we'll be doing for the rest of February. And I hope you'll join us and get loads out of it. In the meantime, take care of yourself and be a leader, not a boss.